Good morning, everyone. My name is Katie Chaswell. I'm from Boomerang Labs. I'm very excited to welcome you to our first webinar of the year. I believe this may be our third, if not our fourth year of running monthly webinars at Boomerang Labs, and we always really look forward to it. So it's been a quiet January as we let everyone have a bit of a break and a slow start to the year, but we're really excited to get back into this program that we run for our network. Today, we are discussing circular design and innovation, empowering the commercial transition ahead of Climate Action Week. For those that are joining and aren't in Sydney and seeing the fantastic promotional efforts that are constantly hitting our feeds, or perhaps you're listening to this recording later, Sydney Climate Action Week is just a couple of weeks away, so it seems like a great time to bring up this topic of circular design and chat to a few people that are really leading this area within circular economy. So today I'm very happy to be joined by three speakers. We have Adam Norris from Annular Design, we have Steve Beatty from Meld Collective, and we have Chris Craner from RK Collective as well. So I won't take up too much time. We're going to get straight into the speakers once I do a little bit of an opening. Of course, as always, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians and the various lands on which we all work and live today. And I do invite you to put that into the chat where you are located. For me, that's the Wanneroo people um, in the Hunter region. We extend our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. If this is your first time coming across Boomerang Labs, I'm sure that's not the case for many of us, but if you are, we're Australia's first circular economy startup and innovation accelerator. We work with startups at the start of their journey, where there's really just an idea worth fleshing out, the way through to late stage startups looking to scale and commercialize. And we're supporting that transition of circular economy through innovation, through small businesses, businesses that are embedding circularity from the start and then going through some different challenges. And that's why we're there to support. We run programs, like I said, at different growth stages, but our events are a really key part of our work in building our community and helping to do our part to build a bit of an appetite for circular economy and understanding of circular economy so that we don't just grow circular startups and help them into an ecosystem that isn't there and isn't ready for their innovation. So we really try to do our bit through our community events, our webinars, our newsletters, and so forth. Just a quick shout out. As I said, we do these webinars on a monthly basis. And next month in March, we are focusing on food waste. So we've got a great lineup that Taylor has just hit go on the Humanitix page. So please feel free to register there. But for now, let's get into today's topic. First up, we have Steve. So I'm going to pass over to you, Steve, if you'd like to get us going.
Hello and thank you. Hi everyone. So I'm coming today from Wongal country, which is on the banks of the Parramatta River, in the local government area of Canada Bay, but it is on the southern shores of the Parramatta River between the Anzac Bridge in Sydney, heading out towards Parramatta to the west. I wanted to kick off just by talking a little bit about the transition and the sort of barriers to transition from a systemic level. And I wanted to start with an example which drives me a little bit mad. And it's one of the things that we talk about in the book I'm working on with Martin Tomich from the University of Technology in Sydney, which is looking at the issue of how we reduce our material intensity of economies like Australia. And it's this issue of how we deliver housing. So we obviously have an issue with housing. We've got supply issues. There's a lot of pressure to build more housing, supply more housing for people. On the drive out of Sydney, and I did this drive on Wednesday, I drove to Goulburn out of Sydney, heading down the highway, the M31, on the way to Goulburn, just as you pass the Welcome to Sydney sign, just past Campbelltown on the southwestern fringe of Sydney, is a little place called Menangle Park. And it's on the Nepean River at Menangle. But it's a new housing development. And they've basically strip the landscape bare. It used to be farmland. If you look at a satellite image, you'll see now that they've stripped it bare. They're building single family dwellings, lots of cul-de-sacs, lots of garages. Less than half the houses have solar panels on the roofs. They are baking in car dependency into that suburb. So the only way there are no services within the housing development. So 200 plus houses already. They're only about a third of the way done. So there will end up being, 700 families living in this area. There are no services within the development itself. So no shops, no pharmacists, no physiotherapists, no dentists, no doctors or GPs. The nearest versions of all of those things are a 12-minute drive away. And that's the fastest way to get there. Public transport takes at least 40 minutes. To get there by bicycle would take you at least 30 minutes. Car, though, only takes 10, but it's still a 10-minute driveway. And that takes you into Campbelltown, which is the nearest sort of built up area that has a supermarket and a shopping mall and a big car park because everyone's driving there because no one can walk. Menangle Park is on the western side of the highway. The right-hand side of the highway is already built up with similar developments. So you get places like St Helens Park, Bradbury, Ambervale, Rose Meadow, and they are all the same. Lots and lots of houses, all single-family dwellings. They've all been built with car dependency baked in. Now, you might sort of look at that and go, well, we've got plenty of space in Australia. That sort of, like why not do it that way? Everyone owns a car and that kind of thing. But it is the least efficient way to deliver housing and deliver services to a population. It is the least efficient way of doing it. It is slightly less efficient than building residential towers of 20, 30, 40 stories like we see in the really built up areas. But it is nowhere near as efficient as building walkable cities, walkable population centres of 4 to 6 stories of apartments with really good public infrastructure, walkable, rideable services all around. So your street level of those sort of 4 to 6 stories are your services. Those are the most efficient ways of doing it. And yet we continue to go about delivering on these things with this fixed conceptual framework. So when I think about how do we transition, one of the very first things I think we need to do is tackle that conceptual framework. This is a design challenge, but it's also a policy and a regulation challenge. We need to tackle that systemic framework and that conceptual framework that says, well, how do we even by default approach these things? So that's my starting point. I'll hand over to Adam. But throughout these conversations, I want us to be thinking about, are we going down a default path of solving some of these issues and delivering on some of these needs in ways that are inherently not efficient and inherently wasteful? And in my view, the answer is an overwhelming yes. Adam.
Thanks, Steve. Steve's completely right, and thanks for sort of setting up the scene. Hopefully what you sort of hear through from both myself and Chris and Steve is that, obviously there's a massive level of systems change that is occurring. We're kind of in this massive point of sort of systemic change, not just in Australia, but globally. And that's really what circular economy is in a nutshell. It's a change from an old way of systems operation that we've done for the last century to a new one, a more efficient one, a less wasteful one. So yeah, I just want to thank you, Boomerang's team, for hosting us today. And thanks for having me along. It's great to be here. Great to be chatting about this topic on a Friday morning, keep the brain juices going. So hopefully I'm here and can inspire a little bit. But yes, my name, a bit about me, is I'm Adam Norris. I'm the founder of Annular Design. So I provide circular design and innovation services for product ecosystems. So what that is, that's product, packaging, services, and strategy, all around that. My background's in industrial design and commercial innovation. So for around 15 years, I've predominantly been in consumer goods, fast-moving consumer goods in the agri-food sectors. So that's seen me work with many multinationals and international organizations, but right through to domestic, small to medium businesses and startups. So I've also taught at some of our institutes, which has been great. So design for circular economy at RMIT and packaging innovation at Melbourne University. So it's really nice to be here, and hopefully I can share a little bit about how we can use circular design and innovation to hopefully unlock what is this massive opportunity, in my opinion. So I did prepare a few slides to both shock and inspire you. So let me just throw them up on the screen. Here we go. Now, of course, with the shock, we all like a good bit of shocking in the system on a Friday morning. So like Steve mentioned, our systems are so inefficient at the moment. They are pretty much to a degree broken. And we do need to spend a lot of time rethinking and redesigning these systems to be more efficient and ultimately eliminate unnecessary waste. Look, this screenshot here is just a snapshot of why, and this is just in Australia, and that was stats from 2024 that were only projected to grow. So in the last 2 years, these have grown. We're not only wasting materials, the physical materials, but think about all the peripherals that are wasted around that, the resources like energy, water, labor, finance. It's crazy when you start to, capture it all. And not only that, like the business models that come down from the system to work within the system are wasting unsold brand new products. Like in what rational world is that a good business model or system to operate within when we waste brand new unused products and materials? So I see a lot of risk, but even more so, I see a lot more opportunity, not just to reduce that waste, but to, build upon other things like true productivity growth, real GDP growth, material efficiency growth. And I do believe Australian businesses could be at that forefront. We could do that through the products that we create, but those products do need more thought and consideration for the people and the environments that they are made for and made to exist within. So if you sort of read between all the lines that I'm talking about here, most of the products that exist today and the materials that we use are creating waste in some way, shape, or form. So that's huge. It's we're in this massive age of rethinking literally everything we use on a daily basis. So when I talk about it, for me, when you say that, that's a big problem to unpack. And you need everyone, not just, myself, Steve and Chris, but you need everyone from, marketing through to, small community groups. You need everyone to be on this journey. And that's what we need in the circular economy is we need more and more people. It's a collective effort. No one business can do this. No one government can do this. No one, industry can do this. It's everyone together, which I like as a whole collective message anyway. But the big opportunity I like to sort of focus on, especially for business, you've got to operate your business at the end of the day. You've got to pay your staff wages and you want to be operating next year. The biggest opportunity, and this was stated by the federal framework for 2035 for circular economy, $1.8 trillion. If that doesn't get you excited, I don't know what will in the business world. But this is huge. So yes, we need massive systems change. And with systems change, we then need the business models to change and ultimately the products and services that underpin both. Now, that's where I come in. If you're following me on my threaded, weaved story, then great work. But that's really where I come in. I look at the product ecosystems and how a product needs to be designed to fit the ecosystem it operates within, the business model, the strategy and the service, and ultimately the people that will use it. And afterwards, if it's designed to last, if it's designed to be reused, recovered, remanufactured, and ultimately eliminate waste. So that in a nutshell is sort of design and the power of design and design strategy. How can we play in this changing landscape? And that landscape is really changing. Especially internationally, we're always led in Australia by a lot of what's happening across the globe. But look, in Europe, these changes are already occurring. The market landscape is already changing. And as we're sort of seeing, a lot of this regulation policy come in that will dictate the way your products and your packaging look and the materials they use and the systems they operate within. What was shown is when this happened in Europe, many businesses were not prepared and they were found to be non-compliant quite often for 1 to 2 years, because what would happen is originally the old business thought was, hey, let's wait until the change comes and then we'll change because we know exactly what's going to happen. But what happened is that the change came in, the legislation, and they all started calling up their suppliers and manufacturers and going, hey guys, can you give me data and information for our digital product passport? And they go, we haven't actually captured some of that. We actually need to talk to our downstream material suppliers. So they pick up the phone. What they're finding is there's this massive hole of not just data and information, but choices around products that is occurring, which means a lot of these businesses in Europe are non-compliant for up to 1 to 2 years because everyone's just, trying to backfill all these blind spots that the regulation is now spotted out, as a requirement to reporting. So what can we learn from that here in Australia is that it's no longer good enough to wait for change. We have to, it will already be too late if we wait for the regulation to come in. And we're so lucky here in Australia because we've got about a 5 to 10 year runway to start planning our transition to reduce that impact to our business operations. So I'm excited, and you can hopefully get the excitement because business using design and strategic thinking, we can start changing our services and our products now by planning for things like generational solutions that, whilst addressing immediate business needs with things like low-hanging fruit, that has a pathway to a circular solution. So what do I mean by that? So for example, at year one, using a generational product solution, what does that look like? At year one, your product has to be, number one, recyclable. So you're closing off that bottom loop. It doesn't go to a waste stream. It could also possibly be using 100% recycled materials and components. By year 3, maybe you implement your first reuse program with your customers. By year 5, you work to incorporate return and refurbishment. That's not only a great thing to keep your products in circulation, but it also opens up a new alternative revenue stream for your business to resell those products. Then by year 10, the holy grail, being more and more circular. Hopefully you can then work with your downstream and upstream suppliers and manufacturers to recapture your product, remanufacture it, and use that product as a platform for your future product iterations. So that's using, paying for your material once and reusing that material and components as a supply rather than relying on new extraction. So that reduces that material input and improves the material efficiency. So yes, design and innovation is critical because we look at, when we look at design and innovation, we look at the business model, we look at the market, we look at the people and the systems that product and packaging need to address. Circular models, we talk about them like this new breakthrough thing, but they're not. The great example I like to use here is Rolls-Royce. Rolls-Royce since the 60s have been operating circular business models. When we think about Rolls-Royce, we think about cars. No, their biggest revenue factor is jet engines. And what they have been doing since the 60s is they've been operating these circular business models by offering leasing products, their jet engines, to their customers. So they maintain ownership and stewardship of those engines. They do by-the-mile payments. They do maintenance. They do repair. And ultimately, they recapture the engines when they're at end of life because they want to pull them back because they've got valuable components on them, components that have a longer life than some of the jet engines because they've been replaced at different intervals. And they'll take those components that are still good and they'll put them on a completely brand new engine and send that out to a customer. So this is a great example of how it's not only a better model for the business, but also their customers. It's reducing the risk and the costs that can potentially ground jet operations for these businesses. So look, with these business models, we can unlock sort of these new revenue streams, which is, big opportunity. We can improve your business resilience. We can look at things like how you can grow your brand perception and retention of your products and services. But the big question is, how do we get more industry and businesses to start to think like this? My solution in all this is, building businesses' design and innovation capabilities. So last year, I created a circular product innovation framework for businesses. That was built upon design thinking, commercial innovation, and emerging circular economy principles. And what it did is it evolved the methodologies to incorporate increasingly complex elements into an accessible, practical 9-step framework. Part of the problem I kept seeing was that I saw, there's so much complexity. I had that slide up before with all the regulations coming through. That's, from a reporting and regulatory, just to play in the market environment, let alone making design decisions around, the material flow, life cycle assessment. There's all this complexity, which is needed to create better product solutions. But I know, especially for small to medium enterprises, it's increasingly complex. You don't have the knowledge or resources to actually access that. So I wanted to make it simpler to create good, well-designed products whilst navigating these complex landscapes. Now, what does that strategic design actually look like? In the second step, we developed a really simple early stage forecasting tool, which identified the risk across regulatory compliance and product standards, but then turned them into guides for your product development, your design decisions, as well as your material choices, and even using it as a strategy to identify customer benefits. So it's bringing the two things together, bringing complexity together with opportunity. So this is, this amongst a number of other great resources that are out there for businesses that are moving into circular business models. I think if businesses start to use these circular design strategies and frameworks, businesses can thrive. And I really want to share a local example. I know often we go, in circular economy and design and innovation, we often use international examples, but I really wanted to highlight one of the local ones that I really love, and that's transmutation. So they really saw an opportunity for themselves and their customers to be ahead of the legislation in Australia. And not only that, they saw it as a bonus to have the top product standards and future-proofing their materials and products, because they saw it as an opportunity to grow their business operations and their business model. So what they did is through, looking at regulation, standardization, and other elements like that, they opened up new business models for themselves and new revenue streams. So they became a material recycler. They became a supplier. They became a product manufacturer. And they also became a service provider, offering their products as a service. And what this did for their customers, and their big customer was John Holland, the construction company in Australia, is it not only assured quality and accreditation, but it really positioned them as a supplier that provided future-proof materials and products to ensure that there was no downtime and that they were compliant in future reporting requirements. So for a large national business, that's critical because these things take time to change. And as my earlier example in Europe, it can really impact business operations when they're not up to standards. So what to take out of all this, is businesses are already doing circular models. They're not new, but the way we're talking about them are, and the way we're talking about the systematic change that needs to occur for the large proportion of businesses to all be more circular, that needs to occur as well. But really what I'm trying to say is that it's viable now. And it's the best way to navigate sort of a unfamiliar, uncertain future as we navigate these changing global systems. How do we navigate policy change, regulation change, and, ultimately as the market landscape changes. So really, in my opinion, businesses that do this and are ready to see this as an opportunity, not a risk, to embed circularity and sustainability as a foundation of business operations will be the businesses that thrive in the future. Here are a few examples to leave you with, and I'm excited to hand on to Chris, who I know is going to really hone down on some practical examples. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Adam. Great, hi everyone. Really glad to be part of this call today. Let me just share my screen. I hope you can see that.
The little small Chris is in the middle of your screen by the looks of it.
Better?
Yeah, if you just want to click presentation mode. Perfect, thank you.
Is it still in presentation mode or did it go out?
It went out, but that's still really clear from there either way.
Okay, great, cool. All right, so hi everyone, I'm Chris. Glad to be here. I'm the co-founder of RK Collective. You probably heard it from my voice. I'm not Australian, I'm actually Austrian, from the middle of Europe. My background is in engineering and pretty much business, so I'm not a designer as such, but I started developing and manufacturing products in 1999. So I do that for the entirety of my life. And I pretty much figured out you can easily work on a product, but if you don't get the front end right, and this is usually where design thinking takes place, it doesn't make sense what you do. So that's why I sort of transitioned in the last couple of years more and more in the design direction, and co-founded with my co-founder Nila Resari RK Collective. And we are essentially a Sydney-based product design and innovation collective. And our focus is really on creating products and experiences with a positive impact on our society and planet. Our objective is essentially that we help entrepreneurs and established companies pretty much to translate their ambitions into tangible results. And over the last couple of years, we worked with various companies on all sorts of products, and co-creation, storytelling, and circular thinking is the core of our practice, besides the traditional industrial design and strategic leadership. But today, I want to share a specific example of how important it is to design with and for humans and how this can be done. So in just essentially like recently, we worked together with a Sydney-based startup here. And those guys were providing e-bikes mostly to the food delivery industry. And I want to open actually with a picture here, which I think is actually quite representative because it sort of reflects what delivery or food delivery really means for lots of delivery riders. They are not much appreciated in our society. If you see them usually on the street, cars hate them, pedestrians shout at them, restaurants don't treat them with respect either. Those guys usually walk with their big backpacks and their helmets into restaurants. So very often restaurants feel disturbed by them. And very often customers ignore them too, right? If you think about yourself, have you ever been in a situation where you were thankful to your delivery rider? Mostly they are late and mostly the food is not good anyway. So there's not much love for what delivery riders receive in doing their job. On top of that, it's a really physically and mentally demanding job as well.
Now, putting yourself in a 18 months away.
Great, thank you. It's a physical and a demanding job as well. And the worst part of all of it is that the industry is essentially not listening to those guys. Very often the industry just provides the standard product, which is a bike, an e-bike. So what we did for this very specific example, we started to engage with those guys, started to speak to them, and we started to learn about their desires and what makes them really tick and what is important to them. Now, the reason why I'm starting with that is because in the traditional business world, you would start just with understanding your user. And you can see that food delivery rider as a user. And they are usually people who are just temporary in the country. Very often they're just in a need for a very flexible job. So they discover food delivery as just a good source of income. And they could use a normal bike, but e-bikes let them earn significantly more. And this was also the reason why this specific startup was picking up that as an opportunity. But we also figured out that e-bikes are expensive. Most of those riders just can't afford to pay like 3 or 4 grand outright when they land into the country, right? So accessibility to such a good and productive asset becomes a problem to them. And very often they're just temporarily in the country, so they don't quite really want to own the asset either. So if we look at that from the perspective of we have a user here who clearly needs or has user needs, but then we also have a human here who operates in a really tough environment. If we all consider that, we can make interesting design decisions. And what we have done together with that specific startup was we essentially decided for a product as a service as a business model. So the transactional or the traditional way, I would say, although Adam, I think, proved the point here that traditional doesn't mean hasn't been done before, would be essentially you produce a product, you sell it out, right? You never see the customer again until the product is broken, and then customer might return. But if you decide essentially for a recurring business model, a product as a service, it changes the dynamics in your business significantly. And what it means is essentially like product costs are considered as total cost of ownership. Very big difference. Total cost of ownership is a metric which essentially describes all the incurred costs of your product from the beginning of use to all the way to the end of lifetime. Asset lifetime becomes a really critical factor all of a sudden because your asset stays on your balance sheet, right? And I always bring this example. Imagine you buy an asset for $1,000 and you can rent it out for 3, 4, 5 years, and it starts to generate recurring revenue. That's the dream of every CFO and every business. And this is a significant opportunity, which essentially is unlocked by such a product as a service business model. What it means for the designer amongst us and the engineers is that it draws our attention really on design for repairability and design for durability. Because all of a sudden you get business metrics where you say, I want my asset operational and I don't want to get it in every month or second month for repair. I actually want to keep it out with the customer as long as possible. And if it comes in, then you want to repair it as quickly as possible. I always share this example of you really want to McDonaldize your operations then. Asset comes in, you remove the spare parts, it all just works. And then, or you remove the parts, you add the new parts, and then the asset goes out again. So this design for repairability and design for durability in this context creates lots of opportunities from an engineering and design perspective. What we also figured out with that specific example was that we had to disrupt this, maybe a bit of a stretch of a word, but we had to change supply chain because this traditional supply chain was set up to build, to ship, and to never see the asset again. And all of a sudden we went back to those supply chain participants and said, hey, look, I don't necessarily need a new bike, but we need now 30,000 brake pads every month. That changed the dynamic entirely because those guys were not set up to sell essentially spare parts as a main business model for them. But at the same time, it also created this opportunity to figured out, okay, there's so much demand for my individual components. Maybe we should put more innovation power behind those individual components, make them more robust, more durable. Maybe we can do something with when we return part of the product. So that unleashed an entire chain of innovation opportunities. And on top of that, product operations is something what we also figured out is incredibly important. So it's essentially you rent out your product, you want to monitor the performance, you want to make sure that your spare parts are always at the right place. You have different participants you need to design your product for. You have all of a sudden mechanics, you have all of a sudden bike handlers, people who move an asset from A to B. And the product needs to be designed for their needs. And the better you do that, the more efficient your operations are. And the reason why I list that out is because that is all really interesting from a design and engineering perspective. And actually not only from a design and engineering perspective, also from a business design perspective, because it creates heaps of opportunities how you can really build up and design a great organization with a world-class product. And what we saw is, this sounds all a lot, and I'm very much aware of that, but if it's done right, the upsides are just like really there. And what we saw are the rider well-being went really through the roof. People who interacted with that specific company just felt that they were understood and that their needs were taken into account. I want to bring one very specific example, which was we had our office above the workshop, and in the morning the riders would line up, they would bring their bike for service or maintenance, and I would go down and speak to those riders, which is a great opportunity in product development. And there was this one guy who said like, hey, look, I really don't like it that whenever I turn my bike on, the light is on as well. And we implemented that feature with the background of we want to make sure that our riders are safe. And then I was speaking to my firmware development team at that moment in time. And we just implemented a simple change and went back to that rider a day later and said, hey, look, return your bike. We just do a quick firmware update. And now you can turn the light on and off. And by default, it is off and you will have to turn it on. And the pure fact that we were listening to a group who otherwise nobody listens to and designed for their need created really strong customer loyalty and rider well-being. What we also saw is that for such a business, you need front of house people, mechanics, essentially the first point of contact for riders. And those guys are very empathetic to the people who are essentially on a daily basis out there and doing the deliveries. So what we saw is that there was some sort of an experience enhancement effect. Front of house guys really try to do whatever they can do to solve the individual problems of those riders. And because the model was recurrently set up, right? Because people were coming back to store, it enabled them to do that, which is, in a traditional sense, really hard because you design your product, you put it in store, and then you never see it again. And then you actually never see the customer. And then maybe in a year, 2 or 3 years, you have another redesign opportunity. So this creates strong customer loyalty. It allows you to differentiate your product amongst competition. And what we also figured out is that those frequent touch points when riders were returning to the stores essentially created upsell opportunities as well. And because you have, like, at least in Australia, you have sort of 2 seasons, right? Warm and cold. There is gear what people need during the cold winter time, and there is gear what people need during the hot summertime. Great from a business perspective. Happy customers deliver a lot of referrals as well, so your cost of customer acquisition goes down. So tons of benefits. And the last one, which I want to be also very explicit here about, is essentially strong environmental impact as well. Because it's not about just producing a product and throwing it out. It is procuring that product, maintaining it, updating it, upgrading it as long as you can, as long as the wheels can turn, because it's good for the business and it's also good for the environment. Yeah, so I think I'm probably reached my 10 minutes here. So that's pretty much everything from my side. So feel free to reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn. Would be really great. And if you have got any specific questions, more than happy to answer them.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you, Steve and Adam. And I think, Taylor's transporting us all in the world of Zoom. Back to you on the screen here. Thank you. We'll go through some questions now, but we've had a couple come through from the chat or some comments, but this is another invitation for everyone to jump in, add your comments to the chat, or even add your hand up if you'd like, if you'd prefer to ask live. Sometimes typing is a bit hard with more intricate examples, so please feel free to do so. We like to be as interactive as possible. Given we do have a couple of questions from the registration, so I might even start there, and then I know I've been writing down my own questions as we've gone.
Katie,
yes.
So could I just pick up on something that Chris just ran through, and Adam said that I think is worth sort of calling out as one of the barriers to this transition. So if you think about the innovation case study that Chris was just talking about, every innovation that they made to the bicycle, they can claim an R&D tax credit on. Every innovation that they made to the service model, they cannot. There's no tax credit for service or business model innovation or R&D or prototyping. So the workshop, anything that they were doing around trying to improve the service that they're offering, falls outside the current tax rebate system for research and development. Anything that they do on the product falls within that current thing. So the incentive continues to be at a product level, right? And from a government point of view, there is no differentiation between the nature of that product and whether it's good for the environment or terrible for it. So if Chris had have actually been working on a product that was plastic, that was glued, that couldn't be pulled apart, that, you know, every assembly had to just be thrown away into landfill and replaced with a new one, he could still have claimed that tax credit for everything that he just talked about in a way that I couldn't as a non-manufacturer but a workshop trying to do service model innovation to not only work on Chris's bikes, but everybody else's. Because I'm not a product manufacturer, but a service provider, I don't have access to that same incentive from the tax system. And it is something that has to change if we're going to incentivize this transition, because there's no incentive for me to try stuff. Right? Like I don't get a share of the risk. So I know we've got some people from local councils, and I know we've got local councils who've been doing some great work around the country, trying to help people set up these repair models and these repair businesses, because the other mechanisms that might get people to try stuff aren't available. And I just think it's worth calling out from a policy level and a regulatory framework level. We don't have the right framework in place to incentivize business and service model innovation. It just doesn't exist.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I think that's a good call to really plain and simple put that out there and to summarize something that you all touched on. Adam, do you have anything else to add to there, rounding out, giving everyone that chance?
Yeah, look, Steve's sort of spot on, right? Australia is a very well-developed service economy, and yet we don't have underpinning resources or support for that. It's just based on go back to the system. It's an old system, right? Post-World War II, mass industrialization, mass scale-up of products and production and material usage makes sense. Everything, all our legislation and policy was built off that to support that. And that's the R&D tax incentive with the physical product. Just no one's really looked at it, like sort of Steve mentioned, and gone, what's actually another higher value one? And that's services. And that's why most major developed economies move to a service-based economy after they've done resource extraction. It's because it's actually a higher value intervention. And yeah, we just haven't done that in Australia. We haven't found a way to how do you incentivize that? How do you support that? Which is, it's really difficult because it's less tangible. And I think that makes it really hard for a lot of policymakers, because when something's tangible, you can kind of point exactly to when it's working and when it's not working. If it's less tangible, like service-based, like how do you prove that when you did a workshop on your business service model, what defined the success, right? It's less tangible, whether it worked. Often takes a longer period of time versus a product. You go, that worked or it didn't work. You know, when you're testing out that new brake pad that Chris mentioned, that is more durable and long life, you know, you've got a measured period of time and you can go, yep, that worked or it didn't work. So yeah, it's a funny world we live in, but hopefully we can get towards somewhat sort of better way to support that higher level intervention.
It's interesting, right? Because it almost implies that business and service model innovation is not as risky or unpredictable as...
Which is nonsense.
Right, completely, absolutely not right. You can iterate faster, right? So you can actually you can iterate faster, but that's it, you know? The risk is still there.
And I guess putting you on the spot here, Adam, but you made a point there. Often developed economies are moving to a service-based once resource extraction is no longer prioritized. Are you seeing service incentives and tax incentives for services in other countries? Are we seeing other countries doing a better job? I'm sure that's not off the cards, but anyone to shout out to?
It's a good question. And I think for me, it's really interesting. Most of the conversation around how do we support other, higher developed orders of economy. There's conversations around, GDP growth is actually the wrong measurement as well. So it's really hard to actually answer that question because there's kind of like all these interlinked systems, and we're using outdated tools to measure them. Really, that's the honest part, is we're just using old outdated tools. Like GDP measurement's not accurate. It doesn't really accurately capture, a lot of our public sector input. Often captures overwhelmingly private. It's just such a hard one. I see conversations about this, but I can't say, maybe someone on the call has seen it, but I haven't seen any governments or anyone sort of implement anything that prioritizes that sort of, systematic innovation and business model innovation.
Steve, do you have something to add there? I see you came off mute.
Look, Australia is sort of stuck in this idea of resource extraction, right? And sure, we've got heaps of it. Fine, we're a big country. We don't take up enough, a great deal of space, but we dig stuff out of the ground or we grow stuff. We send a whole bunch of it overseas, and a relatively small group of us live large on the proceeds, and the rest of us are sort of, increasingly told that we can't afford good services and good public infrastructure as a result. Like, that's basically the Australian economy in a nutshell. We're one of the least developed economies. In terms of our complexity rating, it's terrible because of our focus. But when you look at what we're trying to do to shift that complexity, all of the talk is around manufacturing. How do we make more complicated stuff? And ultimately, what we're looking to do is dig stuff out of the ground, send it overseas to be processed into something useful, and then do something more interesting with it by buying it back from overseas. We're not really putting in, and a lot of the other countries who now make stuff spent the time and energy building the infrastructure to process materials first. So they process materials. You've got mills and weavers and iron ore processing, turning iron ore into steel. We send all of our diamonds to Singapore to be cut and re-imported back to Australia. We don't cut diamonds in Australia or polish them. They all go to Singapore. Why? Not because Singapore has a monopoly on the world's diamond cutters, but because we just couldn't be asked to actually develop a local economy. And that is the same time and time and time again. Are we looking at developing our services? Australia's economy is 70% services. Australia's GDP is 70% services. So despite the amount of stuff that we dig out of the ground, we still have a really well-developed services economy in things like healthcare and education. Education is the fourth largest exporter of the state of Victoria, right? Like, just as an example, it is a big part of our economy, but we don't incentivize its development. We don't do anything to support service industries. We don't do very much at all to support things like, the business models that might support some of this other stuff that we're talking about, to the point where we've got a really strong export industry, like international university students, we put bloody caps on them. We would never put a quota on the amount of iron ore that we could ship overseas, but our education system is cut. Like, we really have this sort of perverse sense of where value is created in the economy, who value is created for. We count the financial sector, even though it's not a contributor of value to the economy. It's a drain on the economy, but it's counted in our GDP. And that's like, these are nonsense things that we do, and it perverts the incentives that we subsequently put in place. So because our focus is on manufacturing, we don't put incentives in place around service. Why? No real good reason, other than it is a much better photo op to stick high vis and a hard hat on and stand in front of a big piece of machinery than it is in a classroom. Much better photo op come election time. That's the only way I can justify it.
Steve, I think I could just listen to you for an hour talking about the complexities of the economy, and this is great.
There were questions. Sorry, I jumped in before you could ask a question.
No, that's totally fine. And I ran with that with some other questions that I didn't want to answer myself. I just prefer to be on the sending end of them. So no worries.
Go.
We do have a question which I might even direct to you first, Steve. Given that you opened today with an example of a region where it's 12 minutes to the local utilities, local resources, we've had quite a straightforward question of how do we make circular economy more local?
Yeah.
I mean, answer that in its plain question, but I'm also interested in your thoughts where we've got these communities already set up and they're already used to that distance, and how do we make them more local, understanding from an infrastructure perspective, but also just a community behaviour perspective as well. People are used to it now.
Yeah, Well, but they'll get used to something different if we transition. Like, and that's one of the things. So one of the key things to start looking at is within a local community, how do you complexify the offering that's there? So how do you make what is available in these, sort of really vanilla, really uniform suburban built up areas? How do you start to introduce things that are available to them? So how do you create community gardens? How do you put in place things like community power and utilities, energy storage utilities like community batteries, put in place solar panels that are shared community infrastructure rather than reliant on individuals being able to put their things in place? We need to understand what material is coming into and out of a local area, and drawing a boundary around any kind of area is an arbitrary choice. We are one planet and the material flows planet-wide. It's very hard to go, well, let's just look at an LGA. And LGAs are struggling with this today. It's how do we draw, like look at our LGA boundary and talk about circularity when all of our manufacturing is outside the LGA and all of our waste is inside the LGA and all of our food is outside and our energy comes from outside. But, like, how do you draw your system boundaries to understand material flows and supply chains? Like, that's a challenge in itself. But ultimately, what you need is more material that is being, so more food that's being grown, more energy that's being produced, less flows in and out, and that gives you some control over things. But whenever you start making anything complicated, then it's almost certainly going to be produced outside of the local area. And just wrapping your head around, well, what does that flow of material look like? Where's it coming from? Where's it going to? What can we do with it to make it last longer? Those sorts of things become something that you can tackle at a more local level. So things like reclaiming stuff at the local tip, collections that allow you to identify materials and goods that can be repaired, having repairs in place, working with manufacturers to provide the expertise and the information and the spare parts so that, things can be repaired and on-sold or donated to charities instead of going into landfill. All of those things are good first steps. That helps to develop culturally an attitude that prioritizes repair and reuse and remanufacture, where at the moment, I'm 55 and basically the entirety of my life, we've headed down a path of disposability. And we absolutely need culturally a shift back towards this idea that used to be the case, where you buy something like a fridge or a washing machine or a car and you expect that it will last as long as you do, sort of thing, right? Like that's the expectation. We've got to get back to that. But it starts in that sort of local area around, well, how do we prolong the life of products and materials? We need to get a sense of where they're coming from. That system sense has to start, but culturally, some of those pieces that start to shift our attitudes. All of that can happen locally within any local LGA.
Can I add something to that?
Oh, you go, Chris.
Sorry, Adam. Steve, I think this is what the interesting side effect of that would be. I think it also creates better communities.
Absolutely, it does.
Higher satisfaction, right? Better participation,
Absolutely, it does.
Resilience. It's not. Yeah.
Yep. But in the face of floods, fires, storms, all of those things that we sort of look at, that resilience will pay off, right? But we look at sort of more broadly societal things around divisiveness, religious intolerance, racial vilification, domestic violence, and a whole raft of other communal issues. All of those will be helped by that communal sensitivity. All of them.
I just want to also build on that as well. But Chris, like that's such a great point. What I see is that to create a better, more circular economy, we're turning from capitalism competition to the next generation of collaboration, right? Not one business can foot this change, foot the bill.
Nope.
When you look at these ecosystems and precincts popping up, it's about shared collective costs, right? And benefit. Because when that is, at the moment, when it's a competition capitalism world, it's one versus the other. So if you have a flood and your whole factory gets wiped out, that's 100% on you. If you're part of a precinct, Just like, we live in apartments where you're sharing it with 11 other people, you get to, everything is shared. And like Chris said, it builds community, but also brings business together and to work in collaboration on similar things. So what I've seen that works well in terms of localized support for circular economy is what councils are sort of doing and looking at is localized precincts based on their primary industry. So if you're an LGA and you specialize in medical manufacture, create a circular economy for that. Be the precinct for circular medical products and manufacturing, because there's so many material streams, there's so many product streams, we could list thousands. So just specialize in one. And when you have enough one, it means that businesses then want to be located in your precinct in that ecosystem because you've got all the systems and services set up to run that type of business. And what that is really just, as Steve mentioned, it is hard when you're creating all these micro ecosystems amongst a bigger than, domestic ecosystem and then a global ecosystem. And they do all have impacts to each other. But I think that micro ecosystem is a really good place to start because it's a specialization. And look, there is tensions there, obviously, depending on what that product or material is, there's a certain scale tension. Like, are you getting enough of the material inputs and outputs to make it viable and feasible for the businesses that operate within that ecosystem? And that also ties into efficiency. Like, if you require advanced technology to recycle and create raw material stocks to feed back into the businesses in the precinct, is that going to be efficiently run? Or is it going to be too costly? Those factors do come in, but it's a great place to start. And I think we in Australia have some great specializations already, especially in the agri-food sector, that we should really hone in on and be like, okay, let's create the complete, end-to-end circular ecosystem for certain areas. And they just become specialized areas, just like, Victoria's the education state and, different states have their specialization. We just need to do that a bit more, I think.
Fantastic. I think that's a good sentiment to wrap up on. I'm noticing it's 11:59 now, and I'm sure we could talk for much more time than we have this morning. But thank you very much, Chris, Steve, and Adam, for your time for the webinar this morning. Thank you, everyone, for coming along and listening in and adding your comments and discussion in the chat. This recording will be shared to everyone that's registered for the webinar. And of course, we'd love to pick up some of these conversations a little bit further down the track and in our social posts promoting this recording as well. So happy Friday, everyone. Thank you for coming along and hope you enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks,
Katie. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks.